So up to this point, here we have an Angular application that is being downloaded from a server, right? Only the index page, the JavaScript, and all the logic that we put into this only executes within the browser, within the current browser session, right? If we reload the browser session, everything just resets to its original state. So we want to be able to create permanent modifications of our data, and the only way to support that is to make use of the server, right? So let's do that. Let's do that. So let's start moving some of this over to the server. So what we have so far is that we have this array of default blog posts here on the client, right? And that we are binding it to this variable blog post, which is then being used to render in the templates. All right, so let's start moving some of this stuff to the server. All right, so to do that, what we'd like to be able to do is make an HTTP request to the server for this data that would live on the database or would live on a server, right? Not here on the client. So we have to have some server-side logic for this, right? So let's create some server-side logic. Okay, so I'm not going to put it in the public directory because in the public directory we put everything that is public, right? That is accessible through a browser that's going to download, right, and execute this on the client side, on the browser side. Instead, we're going to create outside of the public directory. We're going to add some server-side logic, right? So this is blog. So let's create a directory called blog, right? And in there we're going to add our server-side logic, right? So we'll create here a JavaScript called app.js. This app.js is a server-side app.js, not to be confused, right, with the app.js that we have here, right? This app.js is a client-side JavaScript, right? That is that this app.js is meant to be interpreted by the JavaScript interpreted on the browser, right? This app.js is JavaScript that is meant to be interpreted on the server side, right? Interpreted by Node.js server that is running on the desktop. Okay, everybody okay? Right? Both of them are written in JavaScript, but this JavaScript has its limitations, right? It's running inside of a browser. It has some security limitations, right? It can't just connect to anybody through the network. It can't access your file system. It doesn't have a local database, right? But it has all the pros of being able to modify the DOM, right? It can pop up windows. It can interact with the browser. It can do all sorts of things. It can animate. It can do all sorts, load images dynamically. On the server side, we don't have access to a browser. We don't have Windows. We don't have a user interface whatsoever. There is no DOM, right? There is no alert boxes. There's none of that, right? But we do have a file system. We could write to the file, right? We are unrestricted on HTTP. We could connect to anyone on the internet, right? We have no security constraints like we have on the browser side. We can connect to a database, right? But there is no UI, all right? Some things we're going to have the same things to deal with. Just like on the client side, we're looking to break up large application into smaller pieces, right? So on the client side, we use Angular's module mechanism, right, to break up applications into smaller pieces, right? On the server, we have the same general approach, right? We want to break up application into smaller modules. But here we're using Angular to break up things into modules. Here we're using Node.js that we're going to break up into modules, right? So we're going to use Node.js to break up things into modules, right? So to start off, we'll just do a hello world first, right? Console.log hello world, right? And on the server, this is our entry point to our server-side world, right? This server.js, and we can include other modules in this case, we can do it by using require and then other snippets of code, JavaScript snippets of code. In this case, let's starting at the current directory, and I'm going to go down to the blog we just created, and under there's app.js, right? This is going to load that content, right? And whatever's in there, it's just going to execute, right? It doesn't currently live inside of a module, not just yet. We're going to do that in a minute, but just want to show you that you can load and execute pieces of code that are declared in a separate file, right? Now, require you can put the extension, right? The extension is optional, right? It's understood that it's JavaScript, right? So if we restart the server, right, and we look at the terminal, we restart the server. Notice that it says "Hello World." See that? That "Hello World" is in that JavaScript we just created a second ago, right? This one over here. Okay. So now let's declare here a module, a self-contained module, right, where we can put code that's not going to litter the rest of the namespace, right? That it's self-contained in here, and then that we can use it as an instance outside of this file system, right? So the way we do that is by using Node.js's infrastructure, not Angular. There's no Angular here, right? There's no rendering. There's no DOM. There's nothing here, right? It's all server side. So we're going to use module. Module is a keyword in the Node.js infrastructure that allows you to create modules, self-contained, reusable components, right? That can then be used elsewhere. So module, and it allows you to declare things on it, export, and declare a constructor that is going to be invoked and create an instance of this that can then be used outside, right? And anything you declare here is self-contained, right? It's all local variables. It doesn't litter the namespace, right? So we're going to declare over here. All right, so in here, we're going to do console again. And hello from blogs, from server-side blog, right? So notice every time I make changes on the server, I need to restart the server. Right? As opposed to I was making lots and lots of changes on the client side, and I never had to restart the server, right? Because those changes were, from the server's point of view, those were all ASCII static content. There was no need to restart the server. There was no server changes. Here, I am changing the server, right? So these needs to be restarted. Node.js has a mechanism that you can start, which listens for any changes on the server side, and it automatically restarts the server for you, so you don't have to, manually restart the server every time. But let's do that. Let's restart the server. Okay. So for this to work, not only do we need the instance, right? Here's the instance of that function. We actually need to call that function, right? Because it returns the instance, right? And we have to call it to invoke it, right? So let's do that again. There it is. Hello from server-side blog. All right. All right. So one of the things I would like to be able to do is that for that server-side application to give us data, right? Whenever we ask for it on demand from the client side, right? So to do that, we're going to need an instance of app. App, right? If you remember, is it's an instance of the Express library. The Express library is the E in mean, right? And it's a library that allows us to, for one thing, it allows us to very easily create a server listening at a particular port. Allows us to very easily declare a public directory where we can drop in several static content. But one of the most interesting things that allows us to do is to create event handlers, HTTP event handlers, listening for incoming HTTP requests and then responding with dynamic content. All right. So let's do that. I'm going to pass app as an argument, and I'm going to receive here app as a parameter. All right. And in here, I'm going to listen for an incoming GET request. Okay. map to the following URL. Right? It says that if there's an incoming hello HTTP request, I will respond. With I will send back a hello world from the server. Okay, if I restart that and I go back to my client and I listen, I go in and say localhost 3000/hello, right? It comes back with hello world from the server, right? So the server is responding and sending this data dynamically, right? What I've done here, right, is that I've asked the express infrastructure is, hey server, listen in for this incoming HTTP request. Whenever you see this incoming HTTP request that matches this URL pattern, notify me, call me back, right, at this function. I'm going to pass you this function as an argument. You're going to call this function, all right? You're going to call this function, and then from within that function, I can do all sorts of things. What I've done is tie HTTP requests, right, to an executable, right? Almost like a CGI, right, where you have a content that can be executed, right, on the server whenever an HTTP request comes in, right? Very, very cool. This is the basics of creating what we refer to as a web service, right? A web service is a URL endpoint, right, that is there that if you hit it, right, it's going to respond with some dynamic content, right? As opposed to responding with HTML, right, that is meant for consumption from a user. Notice that we've been doing this, right? We've been hitting URL endpoints, yes, but these are not meant. These are not referred to as web services, right? These are static HTML pages, right, that are meant for consumption by human beings. As opposed to this, right, is a URL, still a URL. These are both URLs, yes? These URLs are being handled by another mechanism, right? They're being handled by this mechanism right here, right? Anything that you drop in there in the public directory, right? If you reference any file structure under there, it will and it finds that file that you're looking for. It'll respond with verbatim the file content, right, and just send it back to the server. This other mechanism, right, underneath it's the same exact mechanism, right? This one doesn't match any directory. It doesn't match any file, right? And what I'm doing here is I'm creating this abstract resource out of thin air. There is no file that contains this content, right? There is no physical file with zeros and ones that is stored in the hard drive that contains this content. I can put a for loop in here, right, or an if statement, or go off to a database and generates dynamically and respond with whatever I want dynamically, right? I can compute the response. Make sense? Right? And that's the basis of PHP, JSPs, ASPs, right? Where you're hitting not HTML, not ASCII, you're hitting a executable, right? That computes the content and it responds with dynamic computed HTML. Make sense? And this is the basis of this mechanism. But we're not going to generate dynamic HTML here, right? That's for PHP, JSPs, and other courses. Actually, we will handle that towards the end of the semester. That's way later on. Right now, what we're interested in is not responding with static text. Instead, I like to create a data model here, right? I want to respond with data. I could say that the message is hello, right? I want to respond with JSON data instead of static content, right? So I'm going to restart this, right? And I'm going to refresh this, right? So notice that instead of responding with static text, I'm responding with something that is not meant for a human being. This is not meant for human being consumption, right? This is meant for someone who wants to consume data, right? And then is going to interpret that data and decide how to display it, okay? This might be IMDb, right? Displaying, right, a search for movies and an array of movies with directors and posts and images, thumbnails, and actors and plots, right? Notice that it understands that this is JSON. See that? Notice that it understands that it's JSON. Notice that I did not put double quotes here, right? I did not put double quotes over here, but send is smart enough to know, oh, this is JSON. This is not static text. So it put proper quotings and whatnot, and converted this into proper JSON, right? If you know that this is going to be JSON, send is a very powerful function that can interpret all sorts of things that you can send back, right? Not just JSON, you can send files, images, you can send all sorts of things, all the different types of MIME data types, right? So pretty powerful overloaded function. So if you know it's JSON, to remove some of that overhead of determining what MIME type this is, JSON is specific for sending, specific JSON, right? If you know that the type is JSON, it just would behave the same way. Okay. All right. So now that we know how to do this, okay, let me comment that out. What we'd like to be able to do is bring some of the logic that we have here, right? This array of blog posts, right, and move it over to the server and declare it in a local variable, right? And then if I ask for a blog, for the list of blogs, I can respond with them. I can say, if I ask for /blog, right, I'm going to respond with function. Well, I don't know about you, but this syntax of embedding functions inside of a function call, right, is disturbing to me. And it actually makes it hard to read, but it's actually very, very common in JavaScript. Right? You'll find this all over the place in JavaScript, right? So I'm going to ask you not to do this. So I'm going to move this function out of here, and I'm going to declare an actual function, right? So I'm going to say declare it here. Oops. I'm going to give it a name and call it, find all blog posts. Okay, and then declare this function right here. It makes it so much easier to read, right? Especially, same best practice as we mentioned in the controller. You would declare all your event handlers at the top, right? If anybody cares to read how you implemented a particular event handler, they can scroll down and look at it and look at the implementation. But this is so much easier to read. All right, so here's the find all blog posts, and notice I have this request and response, right? So these objects are being passed to us by the Express infrastructure, right? What's happening is that Express is listening to this incoming request, right? It packages all the information about the request, the URL, the where the request is coming from, the IP address of where it's coming from, the date that it happened, right? All the body that was posted, any query parameters, any path parameters, all the cookies are being sent, all the headers are being sent. All that is provided to me by the Express infrastructure through this request object. Okay? And it also passes me a response object that allows me to send back a response. Right? With these two objects, it allows this function to participate in the HTTP request, response, client server lifecycle. Right? Receive requests from the client, and then respond with a response to the client. Yes, right? So what I'd like to be able to do is request and just say response dot send back this array of blog posts. Right? Send that back. Oops. Right. So if I restart the server, and now I ask for blog. Notice that it comes back with an array of all those blogs. Right. So now we have a place on the server that can give me this data. Right. Right, with the title and proper arrays and proper objects. Notice that I did not specifically say blogs, right? I'm going to stick to singular, right? Just because pluralization is not consistent in the English language, and I don't want to have to think of how is it that you pluralize certain things. Also, because later we want to be able to specify this and introduce the idea of RESTful web services, where if I don't specify which block do I want, this is interpreted as I want all the blocks. If you don't tell me which block you want, it must mean that you want all the blocks. Okay, so the URL might look something like blog, right, and then the ID of the blog that I'm looking for, right, and so I don't want to have to use pluralization when I'm certain. Sometimes I'm going to deal with individual instances. Okay. All right. So now that I have a place in the server that can give me that data, I need to go fetch it from the client, right? So let's go fetch it from the client. So from the client, let's go back to the client on the controller side. Right, on the controller side, what we're going to do is that we're no longer going to do this. Right? We're not going to fetch this. Instead, we're going to go out to the server to fetch this data. Okay, so to do that, we're going to use yet another service called the HTTP service. Right? The HTTP service allows us to participate in that client-server lifecycle, generate the HTTP requests, and receive those responses. Okay. So I can say generate a GET request, generate a GET request, and the URL that we generate that we're listening on the server side is this blog over here, right? So I'm going to generate that blog request right from the client, and this is going to be This request is going to be a long-running request, right? The server might take a couple of cycles to be able to respond to me, and this on the client, on the browser, there's only one of these threads going on, right? JavaScript, the interpreter only has one of these threads, right? It doesn't have the luxury of blocking here and waiting for that request to come back from the server, right? So it needs to use a technique that would allow it to create an asynchronous connection to the server, right? Send off this request and not stop. Continue because it's busy, right? It needs to do animations and listen for our clicks, and it's busy. It's a very busy. Now what's going to do is get. Already, the underlying mechanism is that it's going to generate an asynchronous call. It's going to use a technique underneath that is called AJAX, right? Which is asynchronous Java API for XML that allows you to create these asynchronous calls, right? Underneath, use the browser. The browser knows how to do all these requests, right? All these asynchronous requests, because browsers know how to download images and videos and HTML and JavaScript and CSS from all over the place, right? So this library tells, hey browser, you handle this HTTP request, and then come back and notify me when the server has responded, right? And the way we get notified is by providing. Notice I'm chaining, right? Chaining here. I'm chaining a whole bunch of these methods. Is by providing a function call, function. That is going to be invoked once the response comes back from the server, right? And it's going to pass us the response that comes back from the server in a variable that we're going to call response. We can call whatever we want, but it's response, right? And for now, we're just going to do a console log response, right? So now if we go back here and we reload, notice that there they are. Those are the two objects that came back from the server that we're printing out to the console. But it's very important that you be able to see the network, right, traffic that happened here, right? Notice that if I refresh, there it is. There's a query that went out to the server. Here's the original request that went out, right? There it is, blog, right? And here's the response that came back. There it is, right? The array with both, which we're just printing out to the console. Something more interesting that we could do is just take those two objects that came back and update the blog post, right? The array of blog posts. We can update it from the response that came from the client. We can just say response, right? So that if I refresh, notice that we have our original blog post here, right? So that notice that this first query went out to the server, received the response, rendered this dynamically down at the bottom, and then we would start interacting with them, right? Notice that these deletes are still manipulating the data on the client, right? That too needs to be updated, right? Those deletes need to go back to the server, right? So that we want to remove them. Right now, they're only being removed on the client side, right? So we need to do some more work here, right? Does this make sense? Everybody still with me? Yes.
I have a two-part question.
Yes.
The first part is, does any of this interactivity need to be part of homework 2?
No.
And then the second part is, so some of what we're touching on here is part of homework 3.
Yes.
If you were to do that ahead of time, is that okay?
In assignment 2?
Yeah.
Sure. So the idea would be that you complete assignment 2, tag it, and then you continue with assignment 3, right? I understand some of you already have some experience, working with some of these technologies, and I'm willing to accept that you might move ahead already on assignment 2, right? Because some of you might find that there'll be a lot of repetition, right? Like the header repeats all over the place and the footer repeats all over the place. There might be a lot of, but that was a point I was trying to make. These are the typical things that happen when you're doing rapid prototyping and you're trying to put something in front of the client really quick, and it happens in our development that we have to go back and refactor it and make it for real, right? This is something that happens very, very commonly, that we start off from a prototype and then we have to make it real. Yes? All right. Thank you.